more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Jeremy. Good to see you.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you. Hello. Love doing this on a weekly basis. We're on a roll. And today we are taking you through Munich Dunkel. Both of those words are very specific and they'll help be an anchor for you as part of the dark European lager category tied to the Beer Judge Certification Program 2021 guidelines. And I'm going to set the stage and then Jeremy will talk about specific ingredients that get us to what's in the glass. But I got to say, Munich Dunkel really takes you to Munich, right? This is a beer style historically that was actually started in Munich by the Spaten Brewery. Style guidelines talk about the 1830s, and it was really a development of a style after Munich malt was brought to be. Now, Munich malt, we talk about that a lot in Sense of Beer Style in all of our lexicon, where Vienna malt and Munich malt really are that essence of kind of toasted bread crust. It's a medium level kilned type of malted barley. It's not overly baked and heated in the high 400 ranges. That would give us chocolate malt and all those other type of malts. And it's also not Pilsner malt on the lower or lowest end of kiln malt flavors like Pilsner or wheat. It's somewhere in between. And that toasted bread crust flavors are really indicative of Munich malt, and super excited about it. This is a style that if you can get in any region of Munich, you're going to really be at the home and the heartland. And then you can get ones from all across the world now, right? So with that, Jeremy, you can add anything to the introduction too, but take us into the specific ingredients.
Well, of course, this is a beer style that really originated in Munich as a result of their water. So let's talk about water first when we talk about ingredients. The water there has more solute to it. It was not conducive to hoppier beers. It just didn't come out well. And so they realized that the water that they had to use worked really well with darker beers. And so that's where the advent of the Munich Dunkel came out, is because the malty, darker malts just worked out really, really well. Later on, when they figured things out, that's where we started seeing the Helles, the lighter counterpoint to the darker Dunkel. But using that water to its best advantage, that's where we really get a sense of style, pun intended, when it comes to Munich. But naturally, as you would expect, they're using Munich malt up, maybe as a complete grist or malt bill for the grist up to 100%. But if it's not 100%, they will and can use a little bit of Pilsner malt. They can use a little bit of Vienna malt. And in some cases, they will use some specialty malts, some crystal malts on occasion. But they're still using the typical German hops that you would expect. They're still using the German lager yeast. But when we're talking about ingredients, we kind of also have to talk about process. In this one, they're doing a lot of decoction and some longer boils to really enrichen, if that's such a word. I'm going to make up a word on the fly, enrichen the malt flavor and just really give it that sense of elegance.
And I'll jump in to say, for those that don't know what decoction mashing is, it's a form of brewing process and we have a prep episode on this. You pull off part of your boiling and essence, your liquid ready to be consumed by the yeast, those sugars from the malted barley, and you concentrate them back down, and you boil that section, a third of the batch, even more, and then you blend it back into the main mash or main boil that's getting boiled.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it is a nice little homebrew trick as well. If your mash turns out a little bit colder than you'd like, you can pull some off and boil it and pour it back in, and that's a nice little homebrew trick. But that is decoction mashing. So Julia, as I pour my version of this Dunkel, would you care to talk about what it looks like?
Yeah, and easy enough to follow along if you're actually watching the show. Many of us are listening via podcast, though, so we'll take you through the romance of the aroma and mouthfeel and flavor in a minute. But appearance-wise, this is traditionally dark copper to dark brown, not black, though. Munich malt will bring that dark copper and dark brown notes in the visual color of the beer. Can even have a little red or garnet tint. Creamy essence in the collar of foam, light to medium tan head, not usually pure white, but this beer certainly should be clear. And with that, how are you feeling about how your beer's looking?
Well, and I want to bring that up because I'm looking at the screen and it makes my beer look very, very dark, but it's just an optical illusion. I've got the lights pointing toward it, so it looks dark. But from my vantage point, it is very, very copper to dark brown. I'd give it about a 20 SRM. We'll talk about that in a minute. But because I've got lights coming through it, it's very clear. It has a little bit of reddish garnet tinge to it, so it's definitely within the realm of where it should be, despite what it may look like on
I
screen.
I think that beer literally looks like what I just described, and yet always when we're recording this, the screen and the cameras make the beers look darker.
Yeah.
I'm more interested though. What are you smelling? What's the aroma like?
Oh, and as soon as I pop the cap on this, and I've just fell in love again. This beer is a very malt forward style. And if anyone has listened to these, they know that I'm not a hop head. I do love hops, but I'm a malt head. And so this is where these beers just resonate with me really well. This has a very medium to high, rich, there's that word again, elegant maltiness to it. It can get toasty. It can get bread crusty. You can have notes of chocolate and nuts and light caramel. Just think of like a type of sweet bread you'd have on like Easter morning or something like that with your brunch, and it kind of follows along suit. Um, the hops are very minimal in the aroma. You're going to get just a low noble hop character out of it. This is a malt driven style, but clean fermentation. I'm not getting very much else other than just this incredible aroma of this complex and elegant malt. But Julia, that's what I'm getting on the aroma. What can we expect this to actually taste like?
And so many of the beers, when you are doing sensory, the aroma sets up the stage for flavor. Although you do not get, when you're talking basic taste, and flavor is a fusion, you've heard it a lot from me, flavor is a fusion of aromatic compounds, basic taste, and mouthfeel. The basic taste, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami, you're not going to get any of that essence in the aromas. So what Jeremy just described in that very malt forward beer, and I'm surprised you maybe aren't getting any ethanol either, but you're going to definitely have bitterness that adds to the flavor, where you're not going to get that essence of bitterness in the aroma. You talked about the German noble hops that are allowed by the style guidelines. So I would lead flavor with obviously the rich malt flavor notes, very similar to what Jeremy's getting and what we've described in a medium to high sense, but a restrained bitterness is what the style guidelines talk about. Medium low to medium. So you get a balance from a little bit of those herbal German noble hop notes, but not anything that's going to overshadow it. Also, the less fresh the version that you're drinking is, the less you're going to get those hop notes. And then you're also not supposed to be getting any roast or burnt or harsh characteristics from the malt, as I described, because the Vienna and Munich malt being the star, are those medium level kiln malt notes. You also don't really want to get any caramel. That would be, my edge towards caramel in your version of what caramel tastes like. Also on top of that, clean fermentation profile, which means when you read the style guidelines, that essence of lager yeast. So lager yeast often take a backdrop, and they are not supposed to, in this style, the yeast really be driving any of the flavor. You're going to get, medium residual sugar too, but that kind of takes me into mouthfeel. But this flavor basis is all about the malt, with not too much residual sugar, and lightly balanced by hop bitterness and lightly accentuated by hop flavor and aroma.
And one thing I want to add to that too is we're painting this picture of this sweet malt bomb that it sounds like it might be even kind of cloying. And a quick aside, when I think of the term cloying, I think of it so sweet, it's annoying. It's not cloying at all. In fact, that the hop bitterness is just enough to keep everything in check and everything in perfect balance. The hop flavor is just enough to keep everything in check and balance. And so it really is a beautiful beer that is weighted toward the malt, but everything is as it ought to be. Including the mouthfeel. I mean, this, kind of sliding into mouthfeel in this one, because of the rich malt. When you do the decoction mashing, you end up with sugars that cannot be fermented. They're too big. They're the dextrins, the big sugar chains, and so you end up with some residual sugar. We'll talk about that in the final gravity in a minute. But you're going to end up with a medium to medium full body, but it's still very smooth on the tongue. The carbonation is kind of moderate, it's kind of where it ought to be. But it's never harsh. It's never astringent. And honestly, these are not terribly strong beers. I don't often get alcohol warming as a result of this.
And Jeremy, to add to that, you brought up the water profile and how the Munich region of Germany really created this whole malt, the Munich malt, because of the water profile and that high carbonate mineral content in Munich. Well, that lends to mouthfeel too, where their essence is it doesn't create a dry finish, but it dries things out. It gives it a carbonate balance. So the water profile here is really adding to the mouthfeel, in my view, too.
Yeah, and it's a good point you just made up. I brewed a Munich Dunkel a couple years ago, and I did add some calcium chloride to my pretty pure water that I was using at the time, and it came out beautifully. I mean, I'm not gonna tell you that it was an amazing homebrew. I was certainly very happy with it, but it was that addition of calcium chloride that really put the emphasis on the malt and less emphasis on the hops. And so, this is just a fun thing about how the water profile can change your perception of the beer, and just being mindful of that as well. But let's talk a little bit about the style comparisons, about where that would go.
Yeah.
What would you compare this to?
There's a lot of nuance there. And again, we're talking about Munich Dunkel, part of the Beer Judge Certification Program, Dark European Lager category. So put your head in the game there. And when you come to style comparisons for Munich Dunkel, it's not as intense in maltiness to a Dunkel's Bock. Dunkel's meaning dark. So you've got Munich Dunkel, right? The Munich region's lager that is dark. But then you also have Dunkel's Bock. That's going to be higher in alcohol, and it's going to be more malty than our Munich Dunkel. And then it doesn't have as much roasted flavors and less bitterness of the Schwarzbier. So super fun when you get to try a Schwarzbier. Go ahead and do it. Schwarzbier is not just about black beer and the color. It's definitely about the nuance behind it. But you would want to compare a Munich Dunkel to a Schwarzbier. And then also on the other end of the spectrum, richer and more malt-centric and less hoppy than a Czech dark lager. So if I had kind of a stepping stone of stairs, Czech dark lager would be below Munich Dunkel, and then you'd have Munich Dunkel here, and then you would definitely have the Dunkel's Bock at the top, and you'd have Schwarzbier kind of over here. And so you could kind of plot that out and do a blind tasting of all four of those and really get good at calibrating what this beer is all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you brought up all those style comparisons, but now the actual beers that we would expect it to be, granted, this is a Munich Dunkel. So this is a beer that comes from the city of Munich in southern Germany and Bavaria. So, and not outside the city, inside the city is kind of really what we're talking about. And so if you have a brewery from Munich and it says Dunkel, there's your style. A good example that I happen to grab a hold of is the Eyinger Altbayerisch Dunkel. Other ones that you can expect to find that are kind of classic that fit this would be the Hacker Shore Münchener Dunkel, the Weltenberger, the Weltenberger Kloster Barock Dunkel, and obviously I've had one of these too. These are fantastic. The Hofbräuhaus Dunkels as well. But the bottom line is you may see these in craft breweries, other breweries trying to create this style, and that's great. Go try them. But But this is nice. You can find these directly from the source, and I encourage you to do so. But we have been talking a little bit about residual sugars and body and how that kind of affects how our experience. That takes me to vital stats.
Yeah. And
right?
the stats do matter, especially in your beer studies. You're sitting for an exam and or beer service, lead beer buyer, brewing these beers, etc. We always start with original gravity. That means the gravity and the weight of what is about to be fermented. 1048 to 1056. That's a super easy range to remember. Many of the beer styles, most of them, frankly, fall in the 1050 range for original gravity. So 1048 to 1056 would then take us to a final gravity with that lager yeast of 1010 to 1016. That, to me, anything above final gravity in 1010 or up indicates a little residual sugar. Below 1010, it starts to definitely be more dry on the palate. And then that gives us an ABV of 4.5 to 5.6% by volume. By volume for that range is very sessionable, very palatable, right? And then the bitterness that Jeremy alluded to, and I did too, that really helps bring this beer along is not too significant. 18 to 25 bitterness units for a Munich Dunkel. I've said before in other shows, but to reiterate, if you get to 25 bitterness units, you're certainly getting at discernible levels. Perceptible levels below 10, you can't really perceive the bitterness. You start bumping it up to double that to 20, 25, and you get to start to sense a residual bitterness that's balancing that residual sugar of that final gravity, 1010 to 1016. And then the SRM, the color range, right? 17 to 28 definitely takes us to a brown into darker browns, not getting to black though, definitely not there. And I think that's a good hit and an easier one in the style guidelines to kind of remember, because if you wrap your brain around Munich Dunkel and you're drinking it and tasting it, those statistics really make sense and plug and play with what's in the glass.
And this beer for me, when I was studying and trying to sort out all the vital stats and all the numbers and keep it all straight, this is where I started following patterns of similarities, Vienna Lager and Helles and this. There's a lot of German beers, I call them the base beers, where they are 4.5 to 5.5% alcohol. They are 20 to 30 IBUs, and this one falls in that range. And so it's really the color that distinguishes it. When you start looking at just numbers on a screen and you have to choose the style, that's where just following those nuances and keeping track of those clues will help you get the right answer.
Absolutely. And so let's get to the fun stuff, Jeremy. What's the glassware? What's the serving temperature? So we can finally talk about pairings after that.
Yeah. So granted, we're going to pull this out of a fridge that should be about 38 to no higher than 41 degrees. But because this is a little bit darker, I honestly like it in the low 40s personally, because it opens up and the flavor expresses. So anywhere from 42 to 45 degrees is where I prefer it, honestly. But it does not taste bad at 38 degrees. I'm going to promise you that. And it does not taste bad at 50 degrees either. The glass I'm holding in my hand is a glass I want to drink this out of, and it is a Bierstein. It's only a half liter. You can also expect this in a full liter Moss as well. But I'd also expect to see this in a Willy Becker. But frankly, if it's got some dimples and a handle and it's full of this beer, I'm going to drink it.
Yeah, so glassware, Jeremy, I love what you're describing. Also, the vase style glass that you traditionally see in Germany, used maybe for Weiss beers and the like, would also be very, very appropriate for this glass.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as what kind of food would you like to eat along with this beer?
I feel like every time we're in Germany talking about German styles, meaning a sense of beer style in Germany, we bring up sausage and roasted meats, roasted vegetables. It's because these Munich and Vienna centric malt style beers they just find synergies and bridges and links to other things that have been medium level kilned, I should say. And so I'm going to say German sausages, roasted vegetables. That Wash-Rhine Munster. Munster's not a really potent cheese. It's not all the way to Swiss cheese, which would be fine too, and I think really fun to try out. I would think this Munich Dunkel would take Swiss cheese to a nuttier, more cashew-style place. The Munster's already got that cashew essence to me as a cheese, so I really would love to see that. And then, believe it or not, and I always go to craftbeer.com in my trusted colleagues and I, where we have great pairings devoted to beer styles, and candied ginger beer cake is what we have listed. And I think that totally makes sense. I'd love to see a little snap of ginger. I'd even see people, I'd love to, maybe should I brew a Munich Dunkel with some ginger in it? Ginger brings a little, not what is off-putting, but it brings a sharpness, right? It brings also a bright essence of big flavor. And I'd love to see that sneak its way into a pairing with the Munich Dunkel. How about you?
Well, besides the obvious of German sausage, and of course, you're going to call me out if I say tacos again, so I'm not going to say tacos again, but I would, tacos would be great with this. But, something like something just deeply savory, barbecue, spicy barbecue ribs in this, the sweet and spicy combination always works well. And this is just, screaming for that. Maybe going much farther west and getting some like Hawaiian Kahlua pork type of thing would just, the fatty and in the sweetness maybe the sweetness would counterbalance and just kind of, you start getting more flavors of that slow roasted pork and some more nuance from this beer. And for dessert, you could really play with this. This is a very, think about what you'd like. If you had the flavors of toasted bread crust and chocolate and nuts and toffee, what tastes good? If I were to step out on ledge, I would love for a chef to make me some white chocolate and wasabi creme brulee, and I would absolutely love to drink it with this or eat that with this beer.
This is so awesome. You threw in wasabi. That's the same effect as ginger. So I love it. I think with that, we're going to wrap it up and call it a day. Happy Munich Dunkel studies and drinking and tasting and sharing and brewing and all of that. It's an incredible beer style.
Yeah, and to that, I say Prost.
Prost.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
and me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.